All right, so today we're really going to dig into Brene Brown's Daring Greatly, get to the good stuff, those light bulb moments.
Right, right.
And for this deep dive, that means vulnerability, shame, and what it really means to live wholeheartedly. No skimming the surface here.
And you know what I appreciate about Brown? Is she doesn't just throw these big ideas at you. She gives you a whole new way to see them. Like, take vulnerability.
Okay.
It's not about being weak or anything like that. It's actually like the core of courage, of creativity, of real connection, the stuff that matters.
Yeah, and when you hear Daring Greatly, which, by the way, she gets that from Teddy Roosevelt, you kind of picture, like, this superhero, right? But Brown herself, she's a fifth-generation Texan, family motto, lock and load. Even she had to learn this stuff. It wasn't just, like, in her DNA or something, which makes it even more powerful, I think.
Totally. Her research shows us it's a practice, this vulnerability thing, not like you're born with it or not. And often it's when we feel the most, I don't know, exposed. Like Brown talks about almost throwing up before going on stage at TED.
Oh, wow.
That's when we can really grow.
So it's like that fear is a signal, almost,
Yeah,
that you're about to do something really worthwhile. But it's funny, though, right? We love vulnerability in other people,
totally.
but to show it ourselves, terrifying. Why is that?
Well, and Brown nails this. It's kind of paradox. We judge ourselves by what we meant to do, but everyone else we judge by what they actually did. So us hesitating, weakness, someone else opens up. They're brave. We're wired for connection, but shame, it's like this minefield in the way.
And Brown's own experience with that TED Talk, I mean, talk about putting it all out there. She wanted so badly to look perfect, but she chose to be real instead in front of all those people. What was it she said, that moment when it shifted for her?
She realized her worth, like her value as a person, it wasn't up to the audience to decide. It was already there. And that's huge, that change in thinking, especially when we're talking about being vulnerable.
It makes you think about who you've got in your corner, too,
Absolutely.
The people who love you no matter what, flaws and all. You need that safety net to take those risks, be vulnerable, knowing you're not going to be judged or whatever.
100%. That safety, it lets us be our messy selves, knowing someone's there to catch us if we fall. Because let's be real, putting yourself out there, it's not always easy.
It's not. And Brown, she talks about this thing that holds so many of us back. Shame. Not exactly a fun topic, I'll admit.
Right.
But super important if we want to figure out how to actually live, for real. So how does she even define shame?
She calls it the fear of disconnection, that awful feeling of being unworthy of love, of belonging. And it's different from guilt, right? Guilt is about something you did. Shame, it's like this belief that you, at your core, are messed up.
Such a good distinction. I made a mistake versus I am a mistake.
Exactly.
And there's this story she tells. This guy goes up to her mother after a talk and says, like, it helped him heal from the shame he carried since he was a kid.
Yeah.
Just how deep that stuff can go.
And it shows that shame, it can happen to anyone, right? It doesn't matter who you are. But Brown's point is, it's not about never feeling shame, which is impossible.
Right.
It's about building what she calls shame resilience.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we build up that resilience, that ability to face shame without it, like stopping us in our tracks?
So first, you got to see shame when it shows up. Yeah. Brown tells this story about accidentally sending a really harsh email to a reader.
Oh, no.
And the shame spiral that came after, it was intense. But instead of just letting it take over, she used the word pain intentionally, like to kind of interrupt that shame response, bring herself back to the moment. Powerful, right?
Yeah.
Because shame wants to trap you in your own head, but when you notice how it feels in your body, the pain, that tightness, it can kind of short circuit the whole thing.
Like saying, okay, shame, I see you there, but you're not running the show.
Exactly. And the other part of this shame resilience, it's reaching out for support. Remember what Brown did after that email thing? Called her husband, a close friend, people she knew wouldn't judge.
Created that safe space, right, to be vulnerable and actually process those feelings.
Exactly.
Which brings us to, well, a big one, perfectionism. This idea that we have to be perfect, to be like worthy of love, of just existing.
And Brown's research, it dismantles that completely. She does these inspiration interviews and asks really successful people, point blank, how do you deal with perfectionism? And not one of them said their success came from being perfect.
Really?
They actually saw it as holding them back.
That's kind of freeing to hear, honestly. But if it's not about being perfect, then what is it about?
It's about realizing that perfectionism, a lot of times, it's just a way to protect ourselves. We think if we're perfect, then we can't get hurt rejected,
Hmm.
but really it just makes us lonely, keeps us from connecting with anyone.
It's like that quote Brown uses from Nick Offerman. He compares art to being human.
I love that one.
Both are kind of messed up by nature, right? But that's what makes them beautiful.
It's true. Embracing those imperfections, the cracks, the flaws, that's where the good stuff is.
So the antidote to this perfectionism thing, you got to live wholeheartedly.
Exactly. Owning who you really are, even the messy parts, and showing up in the world with, courage and compassion.
It's about knowing you're worthy, not because you're perfect, but just because you are. But how do you actually cultivate that? That deep down belief that you're good enough?
It's a process for sure. It starts by noticing those voices in your head, the shame, the self-doubt. When you catch yourself comparing yourself to someone else or like trying to hit some impossible standard,
Right.
that's the time to practice self-compassion. Talk to yourself the way you would a friend you love.
So that self-compassion thing is so important. We can be brutal to ourselves.
The worst.
Brown talks about gratitude, too, how that plays into worthiness.
Oh yeah, gratitude's huge. It's
Yeah.
like an antidote to fear, anxiety, and it gets stronger the more you use it. When you focus on what you're grateful for, it changes your whole perspective.
So, like that saying, what you focus on expands.
Right, exactly. If you're only looking at your flaws, what's missing?
Yeah.
That's all you're going to see. But focus on the good stuff, the small joys, even when things are tough.
You start to notice it everywhere.
And that shift, it's amazing for building worthiness. You start seeing yourself, your life, with love instead of judgment.
It's knowing you are enough right now and you deserve good things, love, joy, all of it.
Yes.
And sometimes that means setting boundaries, saying no to things that drain you, even if it's uncomfortable.
Oh, for sure. Setting boundaries is self-respect. It's saying, my needs matter, my limits matter, even when it's hard.
Yeah.
And it's crucial for living wholeheartedly, because then you can show up for yourself and others in a way that feels true.
It's like you can't pour from an empty cup, right?
Exactly.
Got to take care of yourself first.
And that includes asking for help when you need it. That's not weak, that's strong. Knowing you don't have to do everything on your own, that there are people who want to help.
That's that village, that support system we were talking about. Because life is hard. Nobody's meant to go it alone.
It's true. And in those moments of connection when we're vulnerable with each other, that's when we really feel human,
Totally. Brown also talks about this idea of minding the gap between our aspirational values, like the things we say we believe in, and our practiced values, the way we actually live. What's that all about, and how's it connected to vulnerability?
It's like, you got to actually live it, not just talk about it.
Right.
We can say honesty, courage, all that, but if we're not doing it day to day,
It's meaningless.
totally
Yeah.
sends a mixed message.
Yeah.
And that messes with our relationships, even with ourselves.
So being real, even when it's tough, that takes some serious guts. Because then you got to face the stuff about yourself you'd rather avoid, where you're not living up to your own standards.
It does. Got to get real honest with ourselves and be willing to put in the work. Brown talks about modeling vulnerability, being your true self,
Yeah.
even when it's messy.
And she has that story about Susan, the school principal, who gets called out by her own son for gossiping.
Yeah.
And instead of freaking out, she uses it as a teaching moment,
Oh,
owns up to it.
such a good example of minding the gap in real life, admitting your mistakes, owning your imperfections, and using those moments to actually connect with people.
Choosing courage over comfort, even when it's hard. And speaking of hard, Brown gets real about failure too.
Absolutely. She doesn't shy away from it.
She sees it as part of the whole growth process.
Exactly. Like, it's not something to be ashamed of. It's data, information. You can use it to learn, to get better, to be more resilient next time.
And that takes self-compassion, right? Because it's way too easy to beat yourself up over mistakes.
For sure.
But Brown's saying that self-compassion, it's not about letting yourself off easy. It's about treating yourself the way you'd treat a friend.
Yes. We're all works in progress, right?
Yeah.
Messing up is part of being human. And when you can be kind to yourself, even then, that's when you really learn and grow.
Be your own best cheerleader, even when you fall on your face.
Yeah.
It makes me think about those gender roles Brown talks about, how they can box people in.
Oh, absolutely.
Men and women.
The man box, she calls it. All about being tough and stoic. Men can't really express their full selves in that. And women, they're told to be nurturing and high-powered, vulnerable and tough. It's a no-win.
Limits everyone, right?
For sure.
So how do we even start to break free from that for ourselves and like for kids growing up now?
I think awareness is key. Noticing those limiting beliefs when they pop up and being like, nope, not true. Giving ourselves permission to feel everything, the whole spectrum, no matter what we should be feeling.
Right.
And with kids,
Hmm.
showing them that being a man or a woman, it's not this narrow box. It's about vulnerability, empathy, all of it.
Creating a world where everyone can just be themselves,
Exactly.
without the shame, without the fear. And that takes me back to that story about Brown's daughter, Ellen, and the soccer teams at
Oh,
recess.
yeah.
Powerful story.
So simple, but it says so much. Just choosing to be included, even if it meant maybe standing out, it shows how much we all crave that connection.
Yeah.
We want to matter, to belong.
It all comes back to what Brown keeps saying, right? That we are worthy of love, of belonging just as we are. Not because we're perfect, but because we are.
And that belief that you're worthy right now, that's how you live wholeheartedly. That's where the courage to be vulnerable comes from, to take risks, to be your true self, even when it's scary.
It's about accepting those imperfections, having compassion for yourself, for everyone. And then you can really experience life, the messy parts, the joyful parts, all of it.
Exactly. So, as we wrap up, I'm curious, what part of your life is calling for you to be a little more daring? Where can you show up more fully, more authentically?
Because just like Brené Brown tells us, vulnerability, it's not weakness, it's the starting point for courage, for creativity, for real connection. And that's how we live a life with more meaning, one brave, heartfelt step at a time.